You are listening to the Happiest Lives podcast with Jill Lillard, episode 147.
Welcome to the Happiest Lives podcast, where you'll learn to think better, feel better, and become the woman God says you already are. Here's your host, Jill Lillard.
Hey, friends. Welcome back to the Happiest Lives podcast. We're finishing up the series called When Self-Help Isn't Helping. And honestly, this feels like less of a finale and more like we're just tying all the different threads together. So in that first episode, we talked about the worldviews that shape how we think about growth, even when we don't realize they're shaping us. We then looked at stoicism and the way emotional control can sometimes look like peace, but it isn't the same thing. Last week, we discussed manifestation and hustle and how easy it is for responsibility to turn into trying to run your life as though it all depends upon you. And so today, we're going to zoom out because as I've been thinking about all of this, the common thread underneath isn't whether discipline is good or whether your thoughts matter, because they do matter. It's important what you are thinking. The real question is, who is at the center? At what point do we start carrying something that was never meant to be ours? That's where grace comes in. And I want to talk about that in a way that's practical and grounded, not abstract or overly theological, just what it actually looks like to live differently when Jesus is at the center instead of us. So this week I was doing planks and wall sits, which are not glamorous exercises, by the way. They're just uncomfortable. You're holding still and waiting for your muscles to start shaking. And there's always that moment where my brain immediately goes to, this is it. I'm done. I can't do any more. And what's interesting is that most of the time, that's not actually your physical limit. It's just the point where the discomfort kicks in. And I've learned to pause there instead of immediately quitting, but that can be really hard. So if I stay with it a little bit longer, what I realize is that I am capable of a little bit more than I thought. And that got me to thinking about something beyond physical fitness, beyond our bodies, because endurance isn't just physical. There's a mental component. Athletes talk about it all the time, how much a performance is mental training, what you say to yourself, how you breathe, whether you stay present or start spiraling, what you're imagining in your mind. There is a real value in that kind of training. So it's not fake or made up. The way you think affects what you can do. And I don't want to underplay that in this series. Discipline matters. Training your mind is really important. Building up your capacity is valuable. But here's what I noticed. Growing stronger didn't mean I was in charge of gravity. It didn't mean I suddenly controlled how my body worked. It just meant I had more endurance inside the same reality. So I think that is really significant because I think sometimes when we talk about faith or growth, we accidentally slide from I am growing into the woman God says I am to I am responsible for becoming that woman. And those aren't the same thing. There's a kind of steadiness that grows in the Christian life. You do build endurance. You do learn to regulate your reactions better. You do become less reactive over time as you do this work. But that growth does not make you sovereign. It just makes you more able to stay present without panicking. And I started wondering if sometimes we hit that moment in life, the emotional plank, the relational wall sit, and we think this is all I can do. Maybe that is not the ceiling. Maybe that's just the edge of discomfort. And maybe what grows over time isn't our control, it's our trust. I've been sitting in 1 Peter 3 this week, and the more I read it, the less it feels like a passage about behavior, and the more it feels like a passage about posture. Peter is writing to people who aren't in control of their circumstances. Some are misunderstood, some are suffering, some are in relationships that feel very uneven. There's this pressure in their lives, and he doesn't give them a strategy for changing the situation. He keeps bringing them back to how they carry themselves inside of it. He talks about doing good without being afraid with terror. Now, that distinction, I think, is important. There's a difference between reverence and panic, between living aware of God and living afraid of what might happen next. Then he talks about a gentle and quiet spirit. And I don't hear that like we're supposed to make ourselves more invisible. I think it just means that we want to be more settled, anchored, calm. It doesn't mean being passive. It just means you're not scrambling about trying to make everything happen and control all the situations. You don't have to control everything because you have trust. You trust that God sees more than you see. Now, that's been very personal for me over the last 5 or 6 years. I shared in a previous episode that I've dealt with some chronic pain that doctors really didn't have answers for. And I know a lot of you out there have dealt with a lifetime of pain, and sometimes it can be very discouraging. And what I was experiencing in my body just kind of felt like a mystery. I'm someone who likes solutions. Give me the checklist. Tell me the 12 things to do, and I will do them. But this wasn't fixable like that. And that season exposed something in me. I like control more than I realized. I like knowing if I do X, then I'll get Y. And for years, that was not happening. So recently, and I say this with deep gratitude, the Lord has healed me from that pain. Honestly, it just feels like a miracle. I have felt better than I have in years. And I feel like I'm aging backwards in a way. And I don't say that lightly. I am profoundly very, very thankful and honestly surprised because I had just kind of settled into acceptance in a way, not acceptance like I'm giving up and not looking for any answers, but I'd grown pretty discouraged in finding some answers or solutions. And so I felt like the Lord led me in a certain direction, and I really experienced some results I had not expected, and woke up one day and just realized, that deep pain, that deep weakness, it just felt like it was gone. So in this process, I felt like there were practical things the Lord led me to try, but someone else might try those same things and may not get the same results. I experienced that with other things that I was trying in my life and not getting better results. But here's what I know. I can't package it as a formula as much as I want to, because what I did may not be what he asks you to do. But what I realized is what that season grew in me was something I didn't know that I needed: gratitude, humility, and compassion. When you live in a body that doesn't cooperate, and I know many of you have lived with what much worse pain or limitations in your body for much longer than I did, and are living even with some chronic illnesses and diagnoses that feel kind of gloomy. And it can change how you look at life. When you live in that, it puts you in a place where you realize you can't just oversimplify things. You can't oversimplify answers. And it can remove some of the judgment. It's easy to look at people and just say, do this, and then your problem will be gone. But then when you're in that same position, you realize the answers aren't always easy. In that thinking that wants to oversimplify problems so we feel in control, that is removed, I think, when you go through something like that. And more than anything, I think when you're dealing with some chronic condition, whether it's in a relationship or your body, it really is an opportunity to just be anchored to the Lord, because he becomes your hope, the one that you lean on when you're not sure what else to do. And so the Lord becomes more than a concept. Jesus becomes your daily reliance. First Peter says, the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous and his ears are open to their prayers. the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. And that is something, if you're going through a hard time, that you feast on, that you live on, that becomes your daily manna.
Hey, real quick, if you have never come to Heart Scan Week, you need to be there. I'll say it again. Do not miss the Heart Scan workshop, which is going to be live over Zoom. This is an inspiring week that you will remember, and you get to keep the replays forever. It's one of my favorite weeks every time I do it. 5 days, 1 hour a day with me starting Monday, April 27th. This is where all the concepts in the podcast come together and become very practical and accessible, that you can use them in your life in a very tangible way. You can find the link at myhappyvault.com or go to the link in the show notes.
Not because you know how it's going to turn out, but because you don't. And I think that's what Peter is really describing here. Not control, not sticking his head in the sand, but he's really just entrusting himself to God. Jesus entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. And sometimes entrusting means a breakthrough, and sometimes entrusting means perseverance. Either way, it grows something in you that hustle never could. And this is where I think this series becomes very valuable, because when you walk through hard things, years of pain, no clear answers, it feels like maybe you're not even growing, and then the tide turns a little bit, you start to see how easily we can slide into pressure. There were moments in the past 5 or 6 years where I caught myself thinking, okay, what am I missing? What am I not doing right? What have I done to cause this? What do I need to do different? If I just do the right thing, I can secure the outcome. And that's where I think these other systems start to drift, these other worldviews. So stoicism does have something right. There's a point of truth in that. Emotional regulation is important. Not panicking is valuable. Being steady matters. Hustle culture has something right too. Discipline matters. Showing up matters. Effort matters. Manifestation has something right. What you think about does shape how you act. Belief influences behavior. Those aren't lies. The drift happens in who carries the weight, because without even realizing it, we can move from I am responsible for my obedience to I am responsible for making this turn out. And those feel similar at first, but they can create a very different internal experience. One creates steadiness and calm, and the other creates pressure. When I was in the thick of the pain that I experienced over the past 5 years, if I had believed that the breakthrough depended entirely on me believing hard enough or aligning correctly enough, it would have crushed me, because there were days I did not feel strong. There were days I felt discouraged. There were days I didn't know what God was doing. And that's where grace changes the center. Grace allows discipline. Grace allows training. Grace allows intentional thought. However, grace keeps Jesus in the role of God. God gets to be God. 1 Peter 3 doesn't tell suffering believers to fix their world. He tells them to entrust themselves to the one who sees. That's a very different framework than get yourself in line until reality complies. And when you feel that difference internally, it can be very freeing. You still act, you still grow, you still seek help, you pray, but you're not carrying the universe on your shoulders. And that shift, it might be very subtle, but it does change everything. So if we're going to keep using the word grace, we probably need to define what we mean. Because for a lot of people, grace either means forgiveness or it's just a vague spiritual word that sounds nice. But biblically, grace is much more concrete than that. Grace is not just God overlooking your sin. Grace is God moving toward you. Grace is God initiating relationship. It's God supplying what you cannot generate on your own. When Paul talks about grace in the New Testament, he doesn't talk about it like a concept. He talks about it like a power. He says, by the grace of God, I am what I am. He talks about grace teaching us, strengthening us, sustaining us. Grace is the active presence of God in your life through Jesus. It's not passive. It's not detached. It's not sentimental. It's the reason transformation is possible without you becoming the engine of it. And this is where I think we get confused because grace doesn't remove effort. It reorders it. So you still obey, you still take the next step, you practice, you renew your mind, you make hard decisions, but you're not doing it alone and you're not doing it to secure your identity. You're doing it from identity. That's the difference. When scripture talks about becoming new, being a new creation, putting on Christ, that is grace language. Something has already happened. You are already His. You are already brought near. You are already adopted. But then sanctification, this slow, sometimes uncomfortable growth, unfolds from there. So grace is not permission to just coast, and it's not pressure to perform. It's a relationship that transforms. It's God's Spirit working in you as you respond. It's the reason you can endure something you didn't think you could endure. It's the reason humility grows in seasons you would not have chosen. It's the reason I can look back at 5 years of pain and see formation, not just frustration. Grace doesn't mean you never suffer. It means suffering isn't wasted. Grace doesn't mean you don't train. It means training is how you earn belonging. Grace shifts the center from self-production to trust. And that's why it changes everything. Because if transformation depends entirely on me, I will either become anxious or arrogant. But if transformation unfolds in a relationship with a sovereign, attentive Father, I can participate without panicking. That is grace. As I've been thinking about this whole series, I realize there's something underneath all the systems we've talked about. It's desire. Every worldview we've mentioned, stoicism, hustle, manifestation, even certain church cultures, it is trying to answer the same question. How do I move toward what I want? You want peace. You want stability. You want healing, growth. You want your relationships to work. You want your life to feel meaningful. Your wanting isn't a flaw. It's part of being human. Sometimes when Christians talk about surrender or contentment, desire starts to sound suspicious, like maturity means shrinking your wants so you won't be disappointed. But when you read scripture, that's not what you see. You see longing everywhere. The Psalms are full of it. People crying out, asking questions, pleading with God. Jesus tells people to ask. Paul talks about pressing on toward what is ahead. Desire isn't erased in the Christian life. It's assumed. If you didn't desire anything, you wouldn't pray. You wouldn't pursue change. You wouldn't hope for reconciliation. You wouldn't ask for healing. You would not grow. Desire moves you. The tension comes in what happens to desire over time because it can tighten. It can move from, I really want this, to I need this to be okay. And that shift is subtle, but you can feel it. Once it becomes, I need this, pressure enters the room. And that's where some of these systems start to feel really appealing. If I believe correctly enough, if I align my thinking well enough, if I discipline myself consistently enough, maybe, just maybe I can secure the outcome. There's truth in discipline. There's truth in renewing your mind. There's truth in belief shaping action, but none of those things make you sovereign. In Galatians, Paul talks about the desires of the flesh and the desires of the spirit. Notice both involve desire. The difference is what's underneath it. The flesh says, I need this to feel secure. The spirit says, I trust God as I pursue this. I can deeply desire healing. I can deeply desire restoration. I can desire provision. Those desires aren't unspiritual. However, if my emotional stability rises and falls entirely on the outcome, I've shifted into control, and that's exhausting. Grace doesn't flatten desire. It gives desire somewhere safe to land. It lets you say, I really want this, and bring it to God without gripping it so tightly that you're constantly anxious. It lets you pray boldly without turning a prayer into a lever. It lets you grow and pursue change without acting like the whole story depends on you. It allows you to want something fully and still trust God with it. You're alive, you're hopeful, you're praying, you're moving. You're just not trying to run the universe. And that's why Hebrews 11 feels so honest to me. When you read it, you see people who managed things and moved toward them. Noah built something that had never been built before. Abraham leaves what's familiar because he believes something better is ahead. And Sarah believes for a child when it really makes no sense. Walls fall, kingdoms shift. There are real breakthroughs. And then you keep reading. Some were mocked. Some were imprisoned. Some wandered. Some died without seeing what they were promised. And the writer still calls all of them faithful. He tells me faith isn't measured by whether the outcome matches the desire on my timeline. It's measured by whether I trust God inside the tension. Some saw miracles and some endured long seasons of waiting. Both were faithful. I saw Les Mis decades ago when I was younger, and I recently rewatched the actual movie, and it hit me in a way as though I had never seen it before. I forgot how great that it is. So if you've seen Les Miserables, I hope I'm saying that right. Sometimes I mispronounce things. Those young men in the revolution, there's the part of the French Revolution, and there are these young men that are just full of conviction. They believe in what they're fighting for, and they sing with passion and vigor and hope and belief. And then we go to the scene where they're all dead. They die. It looks like a loss. But then you get to the end of the movie when one of the characters, Jean Valjean, enters eternity. And those men appear as he moves into eternity. All those men who had such passion and belief, they are there again. They're alive. They're strong. They're singing. And all of that belief wasn't foolish. It just wasn't fulfilled in that moment. That's Hebrews 11. Some longings are fulfilled here, some aren't, and none of them are wasted when they're rooted in trust. We live in that space, already belonging, not yet fully restored, already adopted, not yet finished. Grace allows you to live there without trying to rush the ending. You can desire deeply and you can hope boldly. You can pray with expectation, you're just not carrying the ending. And this is where it becomes practical. If you don't understand that tension, you'll either tighten into control or you will just stop hoping. Slowly over time, you'll just kind of give up and die in a sense. So when something matters to you, your instinct is to secure it. You'll try to manage outcomes. You'll analyze your belief. You'll monitor whether you're trusting enough. Or you'll shut down and stop expecting anything because it feels safer. But the Christian life doesn't live in either extreme. It lives in trust. The already but not yet isn't abstract theology. It's the reality of how you walk through pain, prayer, and uncertainty. Already you belong. Already the Spirit lives in you. Already your identity is secure. And not yet is everything fully restored. Not yet are bodies immune to sickness. Not yet are relationships perfectly whole. Not yet are all prayers answered the way you imagined. The tension isn't a mistake. It's the space where trust grows. Grace lets you live there without forcing resolution and without giving up hope. You keep desiring, you keep praying, you keep moving forward. You're just not carrying the ending. And this is where daughterhood stops being a sweet Christian phrase and starts being something solid. Because if I don't know who I am in that tension, I will either grip harder or shut down. If I think my identity rises and falls with circumstances, then every unanswered prayer feels like a verdict. And if I'm actually a daughter of the King, not metaphorically, not sentimentally, but legally adopted, sealed, belonging, then my identity isn't waiting on a circumstance to change. It's already established. That changes how I desire. It changes how I pray and how I walk through pain. I can ask boldly, I can pray, I can believe for a breakthrough, and I can move toward growth. I can take responsibility and renew my mind. But I'm not evaluating my worth based on what happens next. I'm not trying to prove my faith by producing results. And I'm not scanning my life for evidence that I believed hard enough, that I worked hard enough. I belong already. That's the shift. When you know you're a daughter, you don't approach God like a negotiator. You approach him like a child who trusts her father. You still ask, you still want, you still hope, but you're not frantic. You're not trying to manage him. You're not trying to engineer the miracle. You're trusting the one who sees what you don't. And I'll say this, I do believe God heals. I do believe he moves. I believe he answers prayer. I've seen it. I'm not toning down expectation. I just don't anchor my security to a specific version of the outcome because my security is in him, and that's what grace does. It moves the center. It moves it off of, did it happen? Did I get it? Did it work? And it moves it on to, who is God? And do I trust him? That is more steady and stable. That is maturity. And honestly, that's freer. You can live hopeful. You can live engaged. You can live with passion. You just don't have to be in charge. And that's what changes everything. So when I say grace changes everything, here's what I mean. Grace means I don't have to carry the weight of being in charge of the universe. That's it. Grace means I can want things, really want them. I can pray for healing. I can pray for restoration. I can pray for big things. And I don't have to turn my faith into a formula. I don't have to evaluate whether I believed hard enough. I don't have to measure my spirituality by the circumstances. That is exhausting. The question becomes, who is God? And do I trust him? That is so different because I still act, I still pray, I discipline my mind, I grow, I still take responsibility. I'm just not sovereign. And that is so freeing. I am a daughter already. Not when the miracle comes, not when the relationship changes, not when the result shows up. Already. And yes, we live in the tension. Some things break through now, some things don't. And some prayers unfold the way we hoped. Others don't. That doesn't mean faith failed. It means God is God. And I get to live hopeful, engaged, fully alive, full of desire, without trying to control the ending. That is grace. And that's why grace changes everything. All right, that's where we'll close this series. If you've been feeling the pressure to think better, try harder, align perfectly, or believe just a little more intensely, I hope this helped you breathe. You don't have to be sovereign. You get to be a daughter. You get to pray boldly. You get to grow intentionally, and you get to trust God with what you can't see. I'll be back next week with a brand new series, and I am looking forward to it. I hope you are too. If this series meant something to you, would you leave a review? It really does help other women find the podcast. Thanks for being here. I'm grateful you spent this time with me. We'll talk more next week.
Hey, don't forget everything that we talk about on this show, renewing your mind, processing your emotions, moving forward past the places you've been stuck. There is a week where all of that actually comes together, and it is coming up fast. HeartScan Week starts Monday, April 27th, and it goes through Friday. 1 hour a day, live on Zoom, and you get to keep the replays forever. It's one of my favorite weeks every time I do it, and I think it could be a life-changing one for you. If you want to sign up, go to myhappyvault.com, and you will find a link at the top of the page, or you can find a direct link in the show notes. I would love to see you there.